Hello and welcome to this chess strategy review of Cat and Mouse. Cat and Mouse is a chess strategy where if you're in a position and you're slightly ahead and your opponent is kind of left helpless, there's not much he can do, and you have time to slowly improve your position before making any serious moves that your opponent may anticipate. You play cat and mouse by slowly building up your position, taking your time while you do it, and you kind of lull your opponent into a false sense of security that allows him to think that you're not really making much progress, but you slowly improve your position, and it may not be noticeable at first until every piece and all parts of your position are in an optimal setup, and then you can launch forward with your plan to break through for a winning series of moves to win the game. And the basic part of cat and mouse is to just do this slowly and take your time, and basically you slowly torture your opponent as they are helpless to do anything about your plans, and they're not able to stop you from slowly building a better and better position. And so before I dive into this game, this demonstration of cat and mouse, I would also like to invite all viewers and subscribers to send in your vote, your request for a chess video topic for the 100th video that is coming up shortly, and the winner will have that video placed for the 100th video that will be coming out. That subject or that topic that I received the most votes on will be used. Okay, back to this cat and mouse. So we see in this position that white has a slight advantage here of an extra pawn on the king side, and also he has his rook in a better position playing offense where black's pieces are playing defense. So black's rook is passive here defending this b pawn. The knight is close to this b pawn, and black's bishop is just in a defensive posture here. And so as we continue, white moves here to c5, repositioning his knight and attacking the rook here on b7. And so here, if we would have bishop captures and then rook captures, white would just be in a better position here, as he would have a more active rook attacking this b5 pawn. The black rook would just be playing defense the whole time, and we have this pawn majority here. So these two advantages, the extra pawn and the more active rook, should lead to a win for white. And so black avoided this position, and instead of capturing this knight in the game, the rook moves to a7 here, trying to become more active. And then we have the following moves: knight to d3, and then check by the rook. And the king moves out of check, and now the rook moves here to d1 to pin this knight to the rook. And also now the bishop is threatening. Well, I take that back. The bishop cannot capture yet, as the knight would just recapture and protect this rook. Okay, here we have king to f3. The king is attempting to move up closer to the center and help guard this knight. And so here the rook moves to d2. And so this move prevented the king from coming in to protect the knight and attack the rook. And if that happened, then immediately this rook could just capture b5. And so here we have the pawn pressing forward and once again attempting to allow the king to come into the position and attack this rook on d2. And so this, the h5 pawn push, this will prevent the king from attacking this rook because now the bishop could just come down and protect the rook and attack the king with check. And so now we have this e5 pawn push, once again allowing the king to come over and protect the knight, which would then put more pressure on this b5 pawn, allow the rook to come over and capture. And so now h4, attempting to distract the white king side here from immediately capturing and also attempting to exchange off pawns. So if you're behind in material, you want to keep your pieces on the board and exchange off as many pawns as you can, because it is harder to win the game with just pieces. And if you traded down enough to just the knight, if the rooks came off the board and all the pawns, of course, you cannot mate with just a king and a knight. So black is attempting to exchange off pawns, which would relieve some of the pressure, and then there would be less likelihood of one of these pawns promoting later in the game. And so capture here, and now the rook backs away, attempting to swing over and pick off these pawns on the h-file, as this b pawn is pretty much a goner now. And so the king comes in attacking the rook, and the rook swings over to try and pick off some pawns and keep the game somewhat even, knowing that this b pawn is about to be captured. But then white will have a dangerous passed b pawn on the queen side there. So capture, capture, and now the rook moves up, giving space for this pawn to push forward and pinning the bishop to the king also. And so here we have rook capturing and keeping an eye on this pawn, which is at the moment protected. And now the pawn is pushing forward. So we see in this cat and mouse that white is slowly improving his position. Now he has this passed pawn on the queen side, which will cause great problems for black. And so here the king moves out of this pin on the bishop, and the pawn continues to press forward. And now the rook must swing down and over to try and get behind this pawn. And the rook moves down, pinning this pawn to the king to try and prevent further exchanges of pawns. And the rook swings in behind. So in general, a good rule of thumb is to place your rooks behind pawns, behind your own pawns and also behind your opponent's pawns, where they have a better chance of capturing or preventing promotion. And so here we have f4 was played in the game. But another possibility, instead of this f4 pawn push, could have been e6, but then we might have a king moving out of pin, or out of the pin on this pawn, and then e7, and then capture, capture, and then the rook takes here. But white avoided this because now if this would have occurred in the game, he would only have one pawn left to try and promote, and black has these two pawns that he can try to start pushing forward. And instead of dealing with this a little more difficult task in this endgame, white avoids this, and instead back here plays f4 to prevent these pawns from moving forward, and tries to avoid pawn exchanges, keeping his pawns on the board and giving him more of a chance to eventually promote one of them. And so the king is just moving back and forth here, trying to see what white will do. And white slowly puts black to sleep with this cat and mouse maneuvering, just slowly taking his time and improving his position here. And so the king slowly moves up to help his passed pawn, but also protects this knight. And now the rook is under attack. And so here we have the rook retreating away from the king, but keeping an eye on this pawn. And now the rook moves forward, pinning the bishop, and eventually preparing for this pawn to push forward. But before that happens, g5 was played next by black. Another possibility, instead of g5, could have been this move here, king to g7, but then that would allow a capture of the bishop, recapture, the knight to jump up in here, preventing the rook from attacking this pawn, and then allowing the king to jump up above the knight and use the knight for cover and help escort this pawn forward. And from here, there would be no way to stop this pawn without the rook having to sacrifice, and then white would just be winning after that with the extra knight. And so black did not want to go into this position, and so instead, after the rook moved up to b8, we have g5 trying to break these pawns apart here and allow the rook to swing over and capture. So we have capture of the g5 pawn. Now the king moves down out of this pin on the bishop, but the rook captures here anyway. And then here, if the king would immediately capture, we would once again have this maneuver with the knight blocking the bishop, or excuse me, the rook's attack on the pawn. And then with check, the king would move up here protected by the knight. And if the rook tried to swing up to stop this pawn, we just have knight to c6 now. And this pawn would not be able to be stopped without sacrificing the rook. And then this extra knight would win for white with these two pawns. And so black avoids that, and instead of king takes here, we have the rook finally capturing this passed pawn. But now we have a problem on the king side where white has two pawns versus black's one and the extra knight. So the game is pretty much lost, but white takes his time using the cat and mouse strategy to just put black to sleep as he slowly improves his position. And here's how he does this. So the rook swings over to capture this pawn, and now we have this pin of the pawn to the king, and so the king gets out of the pin. Now the king moves forward to come in to help capture, and now the king repositions. The rook moves as far away from the king as possible to keep the king from attacking this rook. And after a knight move, check, and now the rook is behind this pawn. Pinning of the knight. And also, this rook moves as far away from the king as possible. And that's usually a good idea with your rooks, to keep them as far away from the king as you can, so the king will not be able to affect what the rook is doing as much, because the rook will be so far away that it prevents any attacks by the king on the rook. And the king swings over to get in front of this pawn, and a waiting move, playing cat and mouse, trying to slowly put black to sleep and give the false security to black that he thinks maybe there's a chance. And the king just moves back and forth, running out of moves. And then we have a king move by white, king move by black, and now finally this knight jumps up closer to the action. Check, king move, and now the king decides to reposition around to the other side of the board. And after a few moves by the other pieces, the king heads to the queen side. And here, after a move by the king, and finally black decides to exchange off. But here, there's no chance. And if I go back, instead of this move here, if instead of this exchange, if we had rook to b1 check instead, well, then we would have these moves: king to c8, rook to f1 to help protect this, but then capture, capture, knight captures, and then here white would be winning. He would control the queening square, and this pawn would just march up to promotion. And so that is why we had this immediate capture here. And then after the king recaptures, we have black trying, but the game is pretty much over and he should resign. We see the computer evaluation is very much in white's favor, but we see here two possibilities for a draw. So black is trying to hang on, but after this capture, black has two options: to recapture or to move to e6, but then after king to c6, taking the opposition and forcing the king to move, it would only be a matter of time before this pawn would be promoted. And so instead, the king captures the knight, but once again, we have the white king taking the opposition and controlling the queening square and allowing a clear path for this pawn to move forward and promote. And so here, I know this was quite long, but that is one of the strategies in cat and mouse, is to do what you could have done in a few moves in 10 or 20 moves, to just take longer to go about your strategy and your plan, and slowly give your opponent a sense of security and kind of put them to sleep. And this could result in them making mistakes also, as they're slowly put to sleep and they have no productive plans to commence with. So you just slowly improve your position and build your position up where all your pieces are in the best spots possible, and then when you are ready in your own time, you launch forward with your winning plan, and black is left helpless, or your opponent is left helpless. And so I hope you've enjoyed this video of a chess strategy of cat and mouse, and that you may be able to use this in your own games to help you pull out some wins against your opponent. And if you've liked this video, please like and subscribe, and remember to leave comments and suggestions, and especially your requests for the 100th video that will be coming up soon. And whatever I receive the most requests and suggestions for, that will be the subject of the 100th video. So thank you, and have a great day.